Hey, it's Rob Ryan. I am back with another new episode of Entrepreneurial Thinkers just for you. If you are passionate about or just even passively thinking about the world that we live in, the effects of climate change, the effects on our planet of the ever rising temperatures, changing ocean temperatures, changing weather patterns, the loss of your favorite animals that you loved when you grew up as a species that are shrinking, being disappeared on the face of the earth. If you think about or worried or scared or are actively involved in any of those topics, this is the episode you're going to want to listen to. But also, I'm going to tell you that this is an episode in which we have a very complex, deep, long conversation with my friend Asher J. Asher is a literal National Geographic explorer. She's been described in the New York Times as essentially like the modern day Lara Croft Tomb Raider. And if that doesn't get your attention and isn't intriguing enough to want to jump in and hear her story and listen to her thoughts on these topics, I don't know what will, because she's one of the most thoughtful, fascinating, deep thinkers on these issues: planetary preservation, climate change, and the climate and the effects of us, the effects it has on us as a human species, and then the effects on animal species overall, and just what we are doing to and what we're done to our planet. This is the conversation that you want to dig into and enjoy. If you're studying these topics, this is the conversation you want to listen to and enjoy. If you're a policymaker in these areas, this is the person that you want to listen to and then collaborate with. So I invite you to enjoy this conversation between me and Asher J, my favorite creative conservationist. And I hope you enjoyed as much as we did making it for you. Hola, hello, hi, bienvenido, welcome back or welcome to Entrepreneurial Thinkers, the weekly show where I get to talk with the best and brightest entrepreneurial thinkers across every sector and segment of society today as we come together conversationally to try and leave the world a little bit better than we found it. And today, I'm so excited to welcome back one of our great friends and show alumnus, Asher J, the founder and CEO of Henoscene. She's returning for her second appearance of what I hope will become regular visits, because I suspect that the topics that we are talking about are going to require us to regularly revisit them over time to make sure that we don't implode as a species or as a planet. Before we dive into the conversation, though, just to be fair to folks who are joining us for the first time and don't know Asher, let me tell you a little bit about her. Aside from being my go-to trusted source on thought leadership on all things climate, species welfare, and generally our planet's health, and all things conservation, she's also the closest thing I'll ever get to hanging out with Lara Croft Tomb Raider. So I'm going to keep her close. Her day job is running Henoscene, the real-time blockchain campaign platform company for corporate brands. She works with them to help connect with their consumers to drive measurable, better outcomes across an array of climate, animal welfare, and public good efforts. She is a literal National Geographic explorer turned entrepreneur, which she can tell us more about later if we like, because most people don't know that National Geographic explorers are actual people. She's an international adventurer, a public figure, and in-demand speaker whose career arc has taken her from the fashion industry in New York City, campaigning against blood ivory, which to me in my mind is like blood diamonds, if people remember that cultural reference, on big city billboards. Her work has contributed to raising consumer awareness and empowering citizen action for well-known brands like Prada, Adidas, Citizen Watches, L'Oreal, and many, many others. She advises corporations and multinational organizations on their sense of purpose. And that, of course, obviously then informs their ESG programming commitments. She's literally my favorite creative conservationist. And I just felt this urgency lately in the last 6 months or so to have her come back on the show to discuss kind of the plight of our planet and us as humans. So, Asher, what's up, buddy? Welcome back.
Such a pleasure to be back. And I always have enjoyed having a conversation with you.
So. I love it. And I love that you indulge me and let me record our conversations that we get to enjoy with each other and share them with the world. So we've got a lot of ground we're going to cover. I really do want to hone in on those kind of three themes that we talked about. But before we get to that, I'm just going to open the kimono, so to speak, and let you run for a bit. It's September, end of September 2024. How's our planet doing?
I feel like we are on the brink of critical tipping points that could result in the world being shaped either for the better going forward, where we start protecting that which truly matters and start prioritizing the agendas, policies, regulatory measures that are required, enforcement that is required to preserve our living natural world, as well as the finite limits of the planet that is needed to be acknowledged in a very real way, because it's
Right.
going to result in whether or not several people get to eat, whether we have any fish left in the ocean. So these are like real big global concerns,
Huge.
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 And it's all on the table right now. It's all pending collapse. We are trying right now. I just got back from a congressional hearing in South Dakota with the indigenous communities as well, called Wild 12 Congress. And we were working on drafting a series of treaties, including and not limited to protecting the high seas, the last marine wilderness, which again, there's only one paper even defining what the word marine wilderness means. And in order for a treaty to get ratified, even in a small room of 30 people, the number of motions that need to pass and everybody needs to come into consensus about is usually down to semantics. We were arguing for an hour and a half about whether or not we should add the word to before every action item. Or
That doesn't bode well for the urgency
and that
of
is
the
the
pushing
reality
that.
of administrative bureaucratical decision making, right? So the actual outcome of protecting the planet is left with people who have the stamina to sit in a room the longest dealing with the most tedious dialogue. And so if you don't have the staying power, then the people who have stayed in the room will call all the shots because you
Okay.
decided to leave because you got exasperated, exhausted. And
Right.
so literally all I've come to learn is it doesn't matter whether you're in the corporate sphere and working with brands that are not willing to make the movement that is required and evidence the stewardship that is required, because it is convenient to continue playing a guns and butter paradigm where one hand is perpetrating the crime and the other hand is trying to provide to ameliorate the situations that the crimes have caused. And nothing truly gets done. The needle isn't actually moving anywhere positive. Very few people actually want to acknowledge this. On top of this comes all of the rulings from the Supreme Court that now enable shareholder value to be prioritized above and supersede all aspects of purpose driven companies mission outcomes. So like if they're doing anything that is purpose related and is not directly benefiting exponential profit and performance, then they can be held liable for that. And I mean personally, like the C-suite and the board members
Right.
sued for it. So it definitely brings forth a terrible concern that we still have decisions being made by critical bodies and agencies that will continue to demean what it means to do the right thing in this world by the
Right.
largest collective, which is both wild and human lives at stake.
And so then all of a sudden, right? So it becomes less attractive or less obvious to do the right thing when we've watered down what
Yeah.
the interpretation of the right thing is to such a degree that it's basically the bar is so low that everybody's like, I don't even know what doing the right thing is anymore, so I'm not even going to bother to try.
And you know, the thing is, people can always come down to having the worst assumptions or conclusions about a situation. And I've come to see how you can get to that polarized perspective. Like, I think what ends up happening is that you come to a framework within yourself, a bias, and then you look for more reasons or ways to justify your predisposition to think a certain way because that's your comfort
Sure.
zone. And it's
Sure.
easier to get into that space than to try to get out of it by challenging yourself with contrary information, right?
Yeah.
And so to actually seek out being challenged, being uncomfortable is critical right now, but very few people are willing to lean into that. It's easier to blame and shame than give people the benefit of the doubt and ask them to participate with critical thinking or show up in a way where there can be dialogue, consensus, and then outcomes. Trying to create a platform that will enhance the capacity for such accountability and transparency has been a literal uphill climb. And it's right now completely at a standstill. And the reason why, and I'll be very candid because it's like, what have I got to lose? You know, the reason why it's a standstill is because the world that is cannot abide a framework that is transparency driven. It is not beneficial, to be honest, you know, to be forthcoming. It's easier to lie by omission, to withhold information, be strategic and covert, be subversive, do everything that it takes to color between the lines and like pass through in a sly or stealthy way, as opposed to actually showing up in a manner that evidences proactive integrity and a willingness to engage from a truly inclusive perspective. Because that means you're truly available, you're truly vulnerable, and nobody wants to be that, right? Nobody wants to potentially get hurt or be in a state where they're actually leaning in because they're so afraid of the worst case scenario that they cause the worst case scenario. And so it's like case in point, like it's happening in my personal life right now, you know, and I'll be candid about that too, because it's like when a person has come to a certain judgment call, as flawed as that assumption might be, if they've made that as their go-to motive, then they're only going to look for ways to assert that pathway as the only way, right? And then you become more and more close-minded, and you're less and less willing to be osmotic or perceptive of any counter information that'll help
and
you.
when we apply that to like fundamentally existential, very complex issues,
they're human
right?
issues, right?
Right. I mean, like these. So we're not talking like, I mean, we're not talking like, you know, whether the Dodgers are going to win or lose tonight. Like we're talking about species survival and elimination. We're talking about us as humans and our ability to survive. We're talking about like
access to food and water, basic needs being
right. Yeah, exactly. Right. And those are inherently, although maybe to you and I, in our point of view, like obvious, right? Like those are, in all like fairness of judgment, like those are complex issues. Like those are layered, nuanced, complicated. Yes, fundamentally obvious truths, facts, science. But then also like when you consider like 8 billion people on the planets and governments and corporates and capitalism and social and all that stuff, like you're like, okay, cool. These are complicated issues. What I'm hearing you saying is like, then we're making them more complicated by our own reluctance, like our own human fallibility, like our own reluctance to engage in open-minded, thoughtful debate and discussion and exploration towards like realities that might look different than the ones we're in, because we can't fathom that. We can't like, nope. I don't want to put myself at risk. I don't want to risk my company, my brand, our profit, our shareholders, my government's position, my political point of view, et cetera. So I'm just not even going to engage. And so by dumbing it down to like just a performative, like headline, top line kind of debate, we're not actually then dealing with any of the complexity or the nuance of the real issues. And so therefore then we stay in this, we get stuck in this stasis. Right. What you're saying.
Because that stasis allows everyone to carry business as usual forward.
Yeah.
As opposed
but you would tell us that the stasis is actually, that's like our human dialogue stasis. But the reality is like, there's not actual stasis when it comes to those complex issues. The complex issues continue to just pour forward and get worse.
Yeah, that's because the doing business as usual is triggering those exponential tipping points and dominoes to move forward in an adversarial capacity. So the fact that we're not willing to acknowledge that trying to stay within the lines that we've been coloring in, which has been to our detriment, as the only way, because we don't want to trouble ourselves with coming up with alternatives, makes it a completely myopic way to move forward. And it's very compartmentalized as well as disengaged with reality. It's sort of you're living in your own delusion, and you think that the fiction is the truth, and you've been in that context for so long that you don't know the difference between fiction and truth, which is even scarier, which is why we live in the era of misinformation and disinformation. But I think there's a fundamental disconnect with being able to perceive that which can be ratified and then corroborated because there's actual evidentiary trails behind its existence, versus that which you've construed in your own mind based on having read something somewhere, conjecture, coincidence, and, you know, I don't know, random like things like seeing an image on a piece of toast as a sign. Like brilliant that you can believe that is a truth. It might be your truth in that moment, but it's only relevant to you, and it does not have any broader application, right? A real truth is something that is out of shared reality. It's out of shared consensus. So I think people don't seem to be able to tell the difference anymore. I've actually started
Right.
having
Yeah, no, I mean, like there's facts. I always say there's facts and then there's opinions, and you have your right to your opinion,
yeah,
but your opinion is not necessarily fact.
yeah,
And those two, and I, like, if you're just spewing opinions, then I eventually lose patience and tolerance with your nonsense that you're talking about. If you want to debate facts, like if you want to come to me and say like, I see the facts and I have a different point of view, or I have a different, that's fair.
yeah.
Like that,
So
like that's
facts have
right.
gotten skewed by the internet and because of social media, where
Yeah.
people come up with their own facts. I can pull out a fact out of my butt right now, right? Like it's like a magic hat that can just throw new
Right.
numbers out there every minute and people believe it without looking into whether that's true. Is it based on a
Yeah.
study? Is there actual multiple papers corroborating that evidentiary output, right? Like it just seems to be like, those of us who truly care are busy arguing over the fact that marine wilderness is only defined by one paper. And we
Right.
care that there's not enough papers supporting the word in order to make sure that we're doing the right thing by asking for that legislative measure to occur.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, there are people who want to completely destroy all marine wilderness who don't care about any papers supporting their arguments or
Right.
perspectives, just going blindly forth, right? So I think there's just like a massive disengagement between those who are awake and are truly going the extra mile to make sure that they have the support they need in terms of actual data, and those who are going forward without any data backing any of the choices that they're making.
You'll laugh. You'll get a chuckle out of this. I've said for years when people would throw the pejorative like woke phrase at like, I'm like, hey, like that literally implies I'm awake and I'm paying attention to what's going on. Like, so I'll be woke all day long because that means I'm literally awake and I can see what's going on around and try and deal with it, right? As opposed to, I guess, I don't know what the alternative would be, like to be asleep, which is what you're saying, like essentially sleepwalking through life. All right, so hold on. I want to go back because there was a little hint in your opening statement of that we're in a moment in time where the complete collapse hasn't yet been fully predetermined and hasn't yet been fully baked, and that there is this sliver of a window, albeit probably closing rapidly, right? That does afford us this chance during this moment to make alternative decisions, to come to better consensus together, and then potentially like put us on a better path. Like there's no easy fix. I mean, it's been thousands of years to get us to this point. I think the unfortunate part is we don't have thousands of years to fix it. Like we have a shortened window of time to fix it. So I would love for you to illuminate for me a little bit, like that there is still hope, I guess, a little, that we're in this window where we can make decisions, policy decisions, political decisions, corporate decisions, societal decisions, individual that we still can make decisions to, but at some point we won't be able to. Am I gauging that right? Like because you're the person in my view, like worldview, like you're the person who has the stamina. Like you're the person who's like, fuck you, I'm not leaving this room, because if I get up and leave this room, then it's going to be left to all you idiots. And I know you're not going to leave the room because you guys are like peeing in a cup, right? And so I'm not going to the bathroom right now because I have that patience and that stamina to fight this fight until I literally
Yeah, and
can't
I
fight
think
anymore.
partly also having a sense of humor about it, because like after you've gone over the word two for about 20 minutes, you have to have a sense of humor to be able to still sit in that room and be like, this is what it's going to take.
Right.
It's funny that the fate of the high seas, where countless marine biodiversity are thriving with or without our input, right?
Yeah.
But because of our disruptive behaviors, they're diminishing. They would be fine if we just gave them the space to exist, but we can't leave anything alone because we're everywhere and we're destroying everything. And so because of that, we need to have conversations about the word to or about a comma and look at whether or not we're mentioning too many action items, because if we mention too many action items, then nothing's going to come to pass. So the fewer bullet points you put in front of a policymaker or a delegate, the better like outcome you're likely to have. At least some basic aspect of that will get ratified, and then you're able to enforce or enact it. And so, like, should we use the word implement in that paper, in asking for the treaty to get ratified? Because if you use the word implement, then maybe it's putting too much pressure and they won't pass it. But if you say just ratify it, they will ratify what you've written as a bare bones sort of, this is what needs to occur. And then maybe you can add the word implement a year later. So like, this is you buying time when we have no time. So,
Right.
I mean,
Yeah,
so for
exactly.
me, it's a constant balancing act of knowing how desperate it is,
Yeah.
understanding that it does hurt to see things that I absolutely love being devastated, being destroyed before my very eyes. If you've made an eye contact ever with a shark or a whale or a dolphin
We know you have.
or a tiger, like, or any animal, a bird, blue jay in my backyard, like, it's impossible not to feel true kinship with it and wanting to
Yeah.
protect that which was once a part of your own DNA, right? It's where
Yeah.
you come from. That is the tapestry of life from which we have emerged. So to not
I mean, literally, like listeners of our first show together will remember that you were a baby shark until you were like 8 or 9 years old.
I was
So,
also a bat and a chimp at some point,
right?
right?
Yeah. So, like, that's
So like having really felt this deep connection with
yeah.
nature throughout my life, I feel deeply pained by
But you don't in the face of that pain on a daily basis, you are still choosing to
take proactive action.
persevere and take action. Yeah, and
And
put
the
yourself in
reason
those
for
rooms.
that is because part of it, yes, it is what else can you do? How can you quit? But the other side of it is also I am a pathological optimist, which I wish I wasn't. I mean, that the hope bites me in my ass all the time. I don't know if I
Some people might not get that impression from the first 10 minutes so far,
yeah,
but yes,
yeah.
I know you are. That's why we're having this
I
conversation.
really believe in people. I believe in the world.
Yeah.
And even when people are behaving horribly to me, I believe in maintaining
Yeah.
grace and dignity and doing what's right and doing it in a calm and collected manner. Because if you allow yourself to be diminished by the contracted capacities of others, then where is the likelihood of anything better happening? Right?
And then the proverbially speaking, like, what's the point?
Yeah,
Right?
because
Like
then
if you're gonna
everybody
if
is
yeah.
small and no one cares about anything other than themselves. And
Yeah.
I feel like if I were to allow the world to make me smaller, then I would be sacrificing my own awareness of knowing that I am as large as the world. So,
100%.
it's like, how can you not stand for the whole when you are whole yourself? Like,
I love it.
it's just what I worked for my whole life. It's taken like, 3.5 decades of working on myself one way or the other to feel whole. Even in the face of absolute personal and professional adversity, I still feel whole. And it's taken a lot to come to that level of resoluteness and connection and self-compassion and
Yeah.
sense of integrity.
No,
So
100%.
I
And
think
and
one
that I
more
mean
thing about that,
those are your hallmarks. I mean, that's like, as someone who knows you a bit, those are the foundations upon which you stand and the
yeah.
work that you do,
And
which
those
we
who
need.
don't experience that within themselves, you can't expect them to suddenly be able to
Right.
understand the language from which you speak because they're
Nope.
not even formed enough to know
Yeah.
how to receive or dialogue with you, given your building blocks are so different and
Yeah.
your foundation
100%.
is so different. And that's why I think, like, this whole thing, right? The planet is not in crisis. We as a species, humanity is in crisis. And we have not woken
Love
up
that.
to our own sense of wholeness, our
That's it.
sense
Like
of enoughness, you know, and without all of those aspects getting activated, without truly waking up to who you are and how you are bringing yourself forth, how you're
yeah.
making yourself available to as many people as possible, to life as a whole as possible, you're not going to change anything. This paradigm is going to be exactly what it is because we
Yeah.
are in crisis, and we
I've said it's one of the many things I love about you, and I've said it to you since we met. Like, I've always thought, and I'm not a active in the community that you're active in, but I'm just this regular citizen guy out here. But for decades, I've been like, I just think we've marketed the whole like idea of like climate / planet stuff wrong. Like, it's not that the rock that we live on, that thing's going to last for like 100 more million years, with us or without us. And what we're doing is it's the without us part. Like, it's literally us. Like, it's the combination of climate and species elimination and food effects and water. All that stuff is literally a direct threat to us. And like, as if like there was a guy with a gun standing outside my apartment door and I opened the door and he would be a threat to me, I would then feel very passionately urgent about it. And that's essentially what's happening on a daily basis in the world we live in. But yet we're treating it like it's like somebody else's problem that they created and it's not really going to affect us. And,
I'm
well,
working
like,
on
I
this.
guess if it gets hotter, I'll be privileged. I'll just move somewhere where the weather's nicer and like,
Yeah.
like I've never understood that. I've always been like, we're not trying to literally save the planet. We're literally trying to save the planet so we can continue to inhabit
We're trying
it.
to save the version of the planet in which we will be thriving. That's it.
Thank
That's
you.
it. You know?
Right? Yes.
And
And
that's
then
why,
we also like animal species and all those other, and yeah. Okay. All right. So we're going to, now I want to break some of this down into some more specific, like more narrow specifics, just because these are things I'm super curious about. So this is still, these are all still huge topics, but I want to try and like nail some more specifics. So one, within the climate discussion, within the bigger climate discussion, one of the things I'm super curious about is like, how could, and when I say now we, everything is going to be just the collective we, right? So we governments, we corporations, we citizens, whatever you want to, however you want to slice it. Like, what are some ways we could apply more entrepreneurial thinking or more open-minded debate or planning just to the idea of mitigating temperature rise? Just that for right now.
okay, I mean, I'm going to take one step back from that before I get into that.
Fair enough.
Which is to say that it's hard. Okay, in my own living environment, right? If you wake up tomorrow morning and you feel like absolutely misaligned within you, just at odds, uncomfortable, unhappy, just can't get out of bed, whatever the reasons, slowly the immediate context around you, your bedroom's going to get ripe. Things are not going to get done the way they normally do. Your laundry hamper is probably going to smell up and build up, things like that, right? You'll see small things building up over time. And a week from there, if you continually been feeling in the dumps, the apartment or the house is going to start looking like a dump. So who we are within is how the world is outside, right? And so when we're talking about climate impact, what are we really talking about? We're talking about how are you showing up today, tomorrow, a week from now, a month from now, that is contributing positively or adversely to emissions, to outputs from your lifestyle, from your choices, from your footprint, that is going to not only impact like your immediate community, but communities globally, right? And so how willing are you to be available to take into awareness that you are responsible not just for you, but for the well-being of everyone around you, and
that's big.
sense of like connection and the sphere of influence stems from being okay first within. I can't think about cleaning my apartment if I am a hot mess within me, right? I won't even do it. My house is going to continue looking like rubbish. Yep. So the same way, how am I going to wake up tomorrow and be like, can I make a better decision about how I commute? Can I take public transit and stuff? I won't even be available to that conversation because I'm so spewing over whatever dialogue I am playing out within myself. I'm so preoccupied and unavailable that I can't have the next big conversation that needs to happen. Which is what I'm saying. Like, I might be going through the absolute worst crisis in my personal life. But even then, you asked me, you gave me a choice even today. Like, I'm going through absolute hell right now. And you're like, do you want to talk about that and just not do the interview?
I was trying to be helpful.
No, I appreciate that. That's so kind of you. But I'm saying I chose not to because for me to continually make it about self and not be available, every day is a crisis day. You're always going to have personal shit go wrong. You're always going to have a reason why I cannot show up today for the bigger picture. Why I cannot show up today for my neighbor. Why I can't show up for the community. Why I can't show up for Indigenous people. There's always going to be an excuse. Then when is the right time to start caring? To start doing the right thing?
And ultimately, what I'm hearing, first of all, thank you for reminding us all that no matter how I'm about to try and pull some of this stuff apart just so we can have different conversational buckets, the reality is this is all holistic from the get-go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? From the moment we're alive with cells and molecules as a species. Okay. But what I love hearing there in some of that conclusionary statement stuff is, like, you just made a great case for like your actions matter. Like, so to the person or persons who, right, are existing in the society that we talked about 10, 12 minutes ago, like the truth is, like, your individual, that you can only be first responsible for yourself and your attitude, your choices, your vote, so to speak, right? But you do matter. Like, because fundamentally if I do it, I can't worry about whether or not all my neighbors do it. But there is a greater just cultural, psychological likelihood that somebody or some number of my neighbors will do X if I'm literally living by that example, right? That's just the nature of like collective community, right? If one person does X and like everybody else isn't doing X, they're eventually someone's looking over going, oh, all right, like he's doing it, like I could do that, like, or oh, I've always wanted to do that, but I was afraid to be the person who did X. Oh, okay, I'll do it. And like, and again, it may not. These aren't like zero sum game things you're talking about. Like these aren't everybody wins, everybody loses.
Mm-hmm.
These are like we all lose, or we all little bit by little bit try and mitigate the loss.
Mm-hmm.
Like we try and mitigate the score, so to speak. That's hugely encouraging.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's hugely difficult, obviously, to take that level of individual self-awareness and responsibility. But it is also encouraging. So I say, like, how do we attack temperature rise? And you're like, well, it's through these individual actions and getting solid with yourself internally, the inner self.
Think about
because
it.
then you're in a better place to make that decision about like, hey, do I walk across the street? Do I walk to the grocery store today instead of taking the Uber or taking the car?
And think about it, right? Like even it doesn't matter if it's the CEO of a company, it doesn't matter if it's a judge at a Supreme Court. You're still a human being. That is a person. Yep. If he is not aligned within himself or herself or their self, since we're being woke, whatever the gender, whatever, it doesn't matter. If you're not aligned within, you're going to show up with whatever attitude issues you have, whatever preoccupations you have, whatever lenses through which you see the world that has not been informed and populated in a holistic capacity to be as inclusive and mindful and empathic as possible. And therefore you come in with an agenda. And then you try to get more people to align with your skew so you feel validated. And then you push forth the skew as the only way. And then you have all these skews competing against each other because no one is holistic. Everyone is playing a part for the whole. They're all pitting themselves up against the whole instead of just acknowledging for an instant that they're a whole that is a part of a bigger whole, you know? And I think there's a fundamental lack of awareness in how anybody is showing up. Doesn't matter their role, because the role is just a fraction of what you are.
No, of course. Yeah, I was going to use this, see if this makes any sense. I was looking at the questions that I have written, but then I was also just thinking about a conversation with somebody over the weekend. Like in the U.S. political kind of cultural discourse, we have these things called YIMBYs, like yes in my backyard, development, pro-development, build more, we need more housing, we need more everything, and then NIMBYs, right, which is where it actually started. YIMBY is just a reaction to NIMBYism, which was not in my backyard. Like, yeah, fix the problem, but do it over there, right? Or fix the problem for the poor people, but just over there, right? And to me, literally, I've always believed, and I guess I get it in the political argumentative discourse, what I'm about to say is the naive point of view. But literally, like to your point, we should all be NIMBY or YIMBYs. Like everybody should literally be like, yes, build part of the solution in my backyard, as well as over there, because we're all part of a collective whole. And fundamentally, that is why I am a YIMBY. Like that's why I'm a yes in my backyard type of person, because I'm like, well, I think we should be building more housing and of all ranges, affordabilities, et cetera, types for everybody everywhere. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm like, so yeah, build it in my neighborhood, build it in that neighborhood. Oh, I went on a walk and I saw like 6 empty lots. Like we should convert those and build it there too. Like, because it's I, as you and I both are, like we wake up believing that we are part of the collective.
Yeah.
And that like if everybody else dies, like I'm alone on this empty planet with it.
And I think like the world would just be such a good place if we were just empathic, you know, if we were just willing to look at the world through another person's eyes every once in a while. But it takes mutual empathy. It can't just be that they are milking your empathy, because that's, you know, parasitic, it's saprophytic, it causes the death of the being that's giving constantly. But where there's reciprocal flows, where there's cyclical flows, where we emulate the very essence of nature, which is that we are an abundant wellspring that can offer up continually and therefore receive continually. But it's very easy to get segmented. And if you're around segmented company enough, then you become fractured yourself. Like I've seen that happen to me in the last year and a half. Like being around certain company makes you diminish that which you yourself fundamentally are, because you lose sight of the whole, because this lack of expansive being and thinking is constantly the loop that you're being sent on because of the way they behave around you, right? And so I think many family dynamics can be dysfunctional that way. Many interpersonal relationships can be dysfunctional. So really, when we are looking at corporations or anything, it's all just the same kind of units at scale, right? So if you
Yeah.
can't do it within this scale of tribe, what makes you think that you can do it in the size of a corporation or a nation or anything else for that matter? So yeah.
Yeah, all right. So I'm going to shift a question that I was going to ask you a little bit differently because of something that you already shared. So rather than talk about like, hey, what can corporations do for their part to mitigate some of these climate risks? I want to take it from a slightly different point of view. You've literally built Henoscene as a platform, as a vehicle to try and help corporations to see pathways to make different or better decisions, right? But yet you admit earlier, like it's at a point of stasis in some point, at some level. So let me ask you the reframed version of the question then. Like, are you so frustrated by or exasperated by kind of your work in
No, I
trying to
think
build?
I believe in the unities of time, place, and action, just
Okay.
quote Shakespeare. And I
Yeah.
think, you could have created something ahead of curve, and it's the timing is not right. And so then you
100%.
just have to wait, and I think
Okay.
you have to learn patience, you have to learn perseverance, because without that, nothing ever occurs. Because you could have all the right tools together, but if the
100% true.
person's not willing to use a single tool from your toolkit, it doesn't matter that you've come up with a hammer, because nobody wants to nail anything. It doesn't
Exactly.
matter. And you can even tell them, hey, this is what you use a nail for. Look, you can hang pictures. But then they're like, I don't like my walls decorated. Then why do you have
And then it's, yeah, at some point, some period of time down the line, all of a sudden everybody's like, oh my god,
Yeah,
we need hammers to nail everything because we want to nail everything,
yeah,
and you're like, I'm ready.
yeah.
Okay.
And so
Okay, all
that's
right.
understanding. But
So then in that context, sorry, in that context, has then should not you personally, I'm not putting this on you and Hennessy, but like, should we continue to try and either expect or demand or cajole help corporations to do their part to contribute in a positive way towards these mitigations and towards these choices, or should we just say, you know what, for right now, in the order hierarchy of kind of priorities where we can have impact and get movement and make progress, corporations are like way down here on the list. So let's just, like, we thought for maybe they would be the leaders, but nah, they're not going to be. So we're going to slide them down here. We'll get to them whenever that moment might change. And let's focus on citizen action and governance and branding and storytelling. Like, is that what I'm feeling? Like, that it's not that
yeah,
you're giving up on corporations, but
no, no.
should we
So
just shift them as priorities?
I think you can't lead the horse to water and expect it to drink, right? Like you can lead it to water and then it does what it wants to do by the water.
Yeah,
So
right, true.
I think that's where we're at. And so what I would say is startups, like everything else in this world, if it's dynamic, if it's present, if it's nimble, if it's adaptive, if it's available and vulnerable, then it can be honest and continue being in relationship with all the variables and the macroclimate that it is a part of, accepting fully of its reality and being responsive to it. That's the most any of us can do for anything that we do. And so whether it's my startup or my everyday life, that's what I do every day. It's just being as available as possible, which means I have to constantly create space within myself, within my company, within what product ideas I might have, within what I might think is the right pipeline for the world, but then it may not be what the world is ready for, in which case you've got to learn to sit and wait, right? And the same thing, I feel like there's been a lot of instances where I've engaged with individual people in corporations where I see them have so much passion for positive change and then fall victim or be superseded by a system that they cannot go up against beyond a certain point. And I can see them look at me with apologetic, almost crying eyes, where they feel like defeated within themselves, that they can't do more. They don't have greater agency, autonomy, sense of belonging or competence being assigned to them, where they can utilize the skills they may even harbor in a timely manner, in a responsive manner. So they can do the very thing that I qualified as most essential, which is to be available, vulnerable,
Right.
responsive.
And unfortunately, also, like, a lot of those people, or too many of those people, are not chairmen of the board
Yeah,
or
that's it.
CEOs.
That's it.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
they usually hire people who are going to be able to look the other way, even
Right.
if it's unethical, even if it is morally questionable, or in any way based on greed as opposed to need. And I
Yeah,
think the
no, no,
world is
100%.
still strayed a long way from being need based and being very greed based.
Yeah, no,
Like,
yeah,
yeah,
yes, we're living in. I had a very simple discussion about my empty apartment a month ago with a friend, and I was like, no, there's a big difference in life, which I fortunately learned years ago between needs and wants, right? And I was like, I've assembled what I need right now, and I love it. I'm grateful. I was like, there's a whole bunch of stuff I want. I was like, but that's not on the budget plan for the next month or two. And I was like, and that's okay. And they're like, oh, but the apartment's so empty and you've been there for 4 weeks. I'm like, yeah, but literally, like the things I needed, I have. And I'm like, beyond that, yeah, wants, that's a whole, but
yeah,
yeah,
that's the other thing. Like,
societally, we live in this huge want bubble.
yeah. Like recently I was at Wild Congress in South Dakota. Okay. When I arrived, my phone had fallen into the ocean. I had no way to be on the grid. You can't even order food if you're on the grid, like
Yeah.
in a city, because it only happens through applications like DoorDash
Oh
or
yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
if you don't have a phone number to verify yourself through, you basically don't exist. So I couldn't even order food, even though I was so sick, I couldn't get out of bed. And
Yeah.
it just was like a huge wake up call to realize how much we take as like for granted, and it's just privilege, and it's like how many people can even have that kind of access to like get food delivered, right? And it can
Yeah.
only happen if you have a phone and if you're like capable of connecting and having the resources and money to like get things where you need it when you need it based on convenience. And we live a life of convenience, and so many of us can just assume that that's the way the world works, and it's not. There are countless people I have met from having traveled, from having like connected with communities on the ground, that cannot even begin to ask for any of this, do not
Yeah.
have the
No.
access
100%.
to
Right.
be
Yeah.
in this narrative arc or on the grid as we have qualified it. So there is a massive chasm through which countless communities fall through and are
Is there
unaccounted for.
is there a place, because we'll go back to again your kind of base premise we started with, where we're at this moment, almost like maybe like this came like we're at a plateau. We've been climbing this hill, we're at a plateau, and we're kind of like, okay, there's more to go, or we could fall off the hill and die. Like we're kind of here, right? So is there a place in this going forward where technology, so we just talked a little bit about it, right, where technology, whether it be like coming technologies, AI, quantum computing, those types of things, or just existing tools and technologies that we've misused or misapplied, like is there a pathway where technology can be a positive contributor to the better
Absolutely.
decisions that we need to make?
I think if we were to map technology to once again be bare bones and only utilized or leveraged where necessary, and building as much as possible on common sense, which would make it like really easy, accessible, inclusive, and therefore available to the lay person for need-based use. And then it can at scale also be leveraged for more output than the basic uh, aspects of it can deliver, right? So for instance, with AI, right now the way AI is being used is so superfluous. I don't think it is what we need to be doing. It's
Right.
so energy consumptive, and people are querying really ridiculous questions that could have been answered by an SEO search prioritization. So why are we using AI in this way, right?
Yeah.
Where is the ethical integrity behind it? And it could just as easily be mapped on ontologies. It could just as easily be mapped on looking at vast troves of information. Like I could peer review papers more easily or access the number of papers supporting a treaty in real time, and AI could make that more efficient. That would make sense to me. Help us
Yeah.
ratify a decision faster using AI, but not for this.
Instead of like this commercialized kind of
Yeah,
superficial cultural use that we're using it now, like you said, to like do basically more sophisticated searching, which isn't better searching,
yeah.
and to be like a writing
And
assistant,
basically
like
plagiarizing and creating content that's rubbish.
right. But then we're like the thesis, the line is we're being sold is, but yeah, because we got to go through this stage first, and then we can apply it to like the complex things, like preservation of the planet and cancer and all those things.
Yeah.
And you're like, no, like the
No.
technology is fundamentally smart enough already that if we just decided as humans to apply it over here, like then it would grow its a usefulness and value. by solving those problems more exponentially faster and more efficient, more help. Like,
Yeah.
it's a
Anything you
fascinating. So
want to
there again,
dream on,
fundamentally bad human choices being
right,
made by how we use the things we invent.
right. And we're scaling like the most snake oil opportunities and capitalistic
Yeah.
forays, as opposed to looking at it from the lens of what could we do to make the world better for all of us, right? And that's a very different lens. But then people will call that socialism, people will call that, but it really is just collectivism. Like, it's about the collective.
Yeah.
Like, let's look at plurality, but from a singularity perspective. We are one, and therefore how can we deliver a solution set that's going to be beneficial for almost all, if not all, entailed by that oneness.
Yeah,
And
100%.
and I don't think we currently have the language for that, because very many people are skewed in believing that certain privileges they have is something that A, they cannot live without, and B,
Right.
that it is the only way that they are able to understand reality. Like, if you take those
Yep.
things away, they lose identity with it. They
Well,
lose.
and we've lost. I say this all the time. Like, we fundamentally, in this argument or societal need or any other, we've just lost complete touch with history. Like, we're so undereducated when it comes to history, like history in the macro, and then our own histories. That we were a collectivist society. Like, like this country, just speaking of like the United States of America, like we already are a democratic socialist country. Like, we have been. Like, how do you think we have like social security? How do you think we have highways that are paid for by our taxes? How do you think we have public school? Like, we already are this, and we were this. This isn't like some policy making campaign promise that somebody made and then shifted one election cycle to the next. Like, this, we were all a collectivist society like 200-300 years ago. Like, I was watching the stories yesterday. Was the birthday of Los Angeles, and so I was like reading some stories online about like the actual like emanation of the literal pueblo that is in downtown still, right? And the original 30 families, and how like wildly diverse these 30 families were. And like, and you're like, yeah, they were collectivist or agrarian group of people
Right.
that then gave birth to what has become this over 243 years. Like, so it's not even like it was like, well, 10,000 years ago, we don't know. Like, but to your point, like, people live behind guard gated communities with 3 cars and 47 devices, and they're in their suburban houses, and they think that they have like a God-given right to that.
Right.
And
they don't care that others don't have that access. That's their problem. They're lazy. They don't know better. They couldn't.
And worse, I would argue, I'm curious to your thought, like, worse is, and I've taken to using a phrase I'll share in a minute, but worse is the idea that like the rest of the world, quote unquote, or like the rest of humanity isn't even saying we want that. Like, we want a 6,000 square foot house behind the guard gate with 3 cars. They're just saying like, I'd like a stable roof with 2 walls and running water so that I can not get dysentery. Like, and yet the people who are saying like, I don't want to lose my privileges are basically like trying to block everybody else from having anything, not just from having what they have. And so I've been saying lately politically to my friends who have different points of view than me, I'm like, what if, like, let me posit something. Like, what if in this election cycle, if you wanted to narrow it down, like, what if you could keep everything you have? You could keep your great job. You could keep all the cars you have. You could keep the house you have. You could keep your great salary, your 3 kids that could go to the private schools. Like, literally, your life, taxes roughly the same as roughly what you have now, maybe a little bit higher, maybe a little bit lower, depending on the circumstance, blah, blah, blah. You can literally keep all that. But while you keep that, and you got great private health insurance because you work for a great company, like, you literally, we're not even going to mess with what you have, but we're going to give everybody else everything else that you have or that you don't have. Like, we're going to give everybody else healthcare. We're going to give everybody else free college education. We're going to build a shit ton of houses everywhere so that everybody else can have the chance to have a housing. They're not ever going to get the house that you have, but they're going to have housing. Like, how would that? And they're like, well, that's not possible. I'm like, no, it completely is, actually. Like, it is completely policy-wise possible. Right. To say, like, you could ascend. Like, I'm not asking you to give anything up in pursuit of preserving species. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to, in the case of climate mitigation of temperature risk, we've talked about like making different choices. Like, But I'm not
People might
asking,
construe that as having to give something up because they
right?
lack.
Like it's like a direct threat to like we're gonna come take things out of
No,
your like even like talk about like gun laws, which we've talked about before, right? Like that's a classic. Like we're not literally gonna come and take the guns you have, but we're gonna say that like for everybody else and you, when you go get them, there should be some common sense rules and laws about who should have them, how they can get them, how long it takes, and blah blah blah. Like how about that? And people are like, no, and it's on this false argument that like again that their privilege is being revoked. And we're like, no, like middle-aged white guy, you're still going to be a middle-aged white guy. The whole world is skewed towards you.
But I think that what is being overlooked in that is there's two aspects. One is people have lost the ability to hold complexity, right?
Yeah.
So they whittle down a conversation into the most binary stance that can be achieved. And then you're either this or you're that. And it simplifies all the shades of gray in between and makes the world so lackluster and utterly flaccid. So it is the inability to understand the reality that we are a part of. That's one.
Yeah.
The other side of it is that I think people also tend to want the world to be the size that they are capable of comprehending it to be. So
and when it's not, when it's beyond that, and this is fair, I can understand this about human nature. It's scary to some people.
right.
Like when it's bigger than they can comprehend, that scares people.
Right. And then there's xenophobia about that, right? Or like it's just aversion to like the larger context because it's not my thing. It's not this country. It's that country. It's not my people. It's those people. It becomes the other. There's a lot of othering occurring in this world because it's a way to distance yourself from being a part of the whole narrative. Yep. And ever perceiving the whole or taking responsibility for that whole. And I think, again, when we look at any of the issues that are unfolding in the world, whether it's biodiversity loss, I do think, yes, you might have to give some things up so that which you've acquired at the cost of those living things, at the cost of the planet, that cost has to be paid up now. We have to cough up and pay the piper.
But even in that, even the way you describe that, I apologize for interrupting, even the way you describe that, like it's kind of like okay, net going forward, there's a cost. Like you need to make some different decisions going forward. But like we're not going back and like punishing you for the life you had. Like that's it. That's already lived. It's done. Like
they've conflated this sense of self and identity so closely with everything that you describe as an externality. To you and I, maybe like me having this cup is an externality. If somebody comes and takes this cup, they're just taking the cup. It's not like they're taking a part of me. But for very many people, this cup could be who they are. Right? You take this cup, you're taking a part of them. And there goes all the memories I've had with this cup, where this cup when I were one, right? And now that is gone. And therefore I feel like I have been eviscerated. And honestly, like very recently, I had a very good conversation with a friend of mine because I was literally like without anything. I didn't even have access to money. I was literally stranded in South Dakota and I was really sick. And so I was having a conversation with my friend, a person like who met me after like literally, I think a decade, was like, I'll take you out for lunch. Let's go out. And I was like, okay, by some grace, I'm going out now. It's like somehow something's figuring itself out. And she's like, how are you so calm about like life being difficult for you? And I was like, because you at some point have to learn to surrender. And that humility that is required to surrender to the greater context itself allows you to have compassion for others, allows you to have room to take in something outside of just my ability to control, curate, and somehow have my finger in every aspect of existence, which you cannot. But to relinquish that sense of power, that construct of power, cannot occur unless you have something deeper within you that is able to acknowledge you're not the sum total of this world. You are not everything. Not from an egoic perspective. You are everything from a spiritual presence perspective, not from an egoic personhood perspective.
No, and you have immense power as an individual, yet that power is actually more valuable to you and to the more meaningful and valuable to you and your family if it's deployed inside the larger world, right? As you referenced before, I love the phraseology you used about this idea of like, if we continually make ourselves and then make so much of everything around us like smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, like, right, then like it
But the
loses
expansion doesn't occur from identification, right? It doesn't occur because I think I'm this cup and this cup. Now I'm bigger. Like that's not how it works. It works because you
right.
think, you go outside of the thinking construct, and the thinking is not the primary driver for how you experience life. It is a felt understanding, right?
Yeah, boy,
And that's experiential.
the monks had a line on this health lifestyle, right, for like the
Right.
last couple thousand years, right? All right, so one of the we talked a lot. I'm going to hit on a big topic because I want you to kind of maybe just update us. So this isn't, we don't have to dive into tons of opinions, but I want you to kind of give people some perspective because I don't think people think about what we're about to talk about very often. So you've explained, and I deeply understand from following you as religiously as I do, that like this is all inextricably linked together. These aren't separate topics, Rob. Like as much as I might like to try and simplify a conversation, like temperature rise and ocean changes and weather changes and species decimation and human consumption and all of it is inextricably linked together, and very nuanced. But there are pieces of it that I just don't think people pay as much attention to, and species loss and the loss of these amazing beloved creatures that, you know, if old guy like me was old enough to like be alive and watch flourish and just thought was part of nature, this is, they were going to exist forever, and now some of them are gone, right? Lots of them are gone, and or they're like fast on the way out. Like, talk to us a little bit about just where we're at today, not even so much about like species preservation and what can we do, but more about just give us a snapshot of like how dramatic our species loss on the planet is, and then maybe help us, the novice in us, understand why that then matters, like why that affects the rest of our lives on the planet and us as a species.
So I mean, like there's a lot of different numbers out there about what period of time in which we've lost how much, right? Whether it's 50%, 70%. So I'll leave it to people to like look at that. But what I
But quick, before you like, those are the like it's 50 or 70, like we're up there now, like
right,
we're
right, right.
not,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
this isn't
No,
like 3% species loss, like
yeah, 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 yeah. I think like what we don't realize is that like we have basically begin to silence the world and change the very landscape of sensorial expression for the planet. And its resiliency comes from being able to have as much soundscape as possible, by which I mean, you know, your crickets, frogs, birds singing, they all layer over one another and create what is a dynamic natural landscape. Same thing in terms of feeling. You have so many different types of textures in a healthy landscape. You have, in terms of like a tactile experience of what you can visibly see, there's so many colors. It's so rich, it's nuanced, it's layered, it's dimensional. So if you were to look at each of your senses, what you can smell when you go into a really healthy ecosystem, you once again take in so many different scents, from the scats of different organisms to how detritus is decaying to the wet moisture in the different layers of leaves in a canopy. Like, you experience life in a very rich way when life is allowed to remain intact. So when you start to diminish that capacity and everything begins to look the same, sound the same, smell the same, feel the same, it becomes very sterile, which shows a diminishment of a living ecosystem. And I think that's the part that we really need to look at, is just on a very fundamental level. Like, I don't want to get into like, oh yes, the planet's been around 4.5 billion years, but it's been increasingly influenced like in the last 100,000 years by us. Or the Industrial Revolution is what has caused this precipitous decline. You know, like there's so many things we can keep blaming, but fundamentally what we're doing is eroding into the sensorial experience of life. And we need to ask ourselves why we want such blandness. Why are we making this incredibly diverse and abundant world into something really bland and lackluster and two-dimensional? Like, it's getting completely decimated. We're making it barren and without any real reasoning for it, because if anybody is missing out, it's us. We don't get to experience this richness that we get to be a part of every day and that we seem to take for granted, you know?
is a big part of the answer, or is one part of the answer we're allowing the planet to be turned into, by us, by our fellow citizens, into basically the Marriott version of the planet. We're allowing that to happen because it's just commercially useful to us. Like, so we're so like the homogenization, the standardization, the predictability of a sensory rich environment with the diverse population of species who live naturally in wild or tame, like that's just not commercially helpful to us. So we're stripping it all out because we're just trying to extract everything we can out of this place. Is that what's going
I
on?
think money has divorced itself from all tangible realities and all carrying capacities and sort of the finite limitations of this fragile planet, and how what it needs as a critical balance for it to sustain life in an optimal capacity. So yes, this planet has been around, at a time when like Thea collided into her and like basically decimated her, and then she
Right.
recoalesced and became Earth, and we have the moon. So yes, this planet can literally survive another planet going into it, So
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you can talk all you want, but we're talking about celestial deep time versus like what we need in order for us to exist happily in a healthy way, loving the people we love, being in the communities that we are, and fostering each other, allowing each other to flourish, as opposed to be constantly compromised and on tenterhooks around how we can or cannot function on a day-to-day basis. Like we're in a highly anxious state of being instead of being awakened and aligned. And that's where we need to get toward, is to stop being in this heightened state of being constantly on edge and rather move towards being like peaceful and just
Yeah.
happy, you know?
No, yeah, more like you said. No, again, more collectively aligned with each other's well-being, and then therefore your own, right, and vice versa. Um, One of the ways that I read a lot about this playing out, right, all these countervailing effects coalescing, so to speak, is they refer to it now as like climate migration, right? So this simple but very sad and complex process of the fact that literally people like humans, species, like that we will migrate just like animals do. Like we will migrate to places that are then therefore more livable by us, right? Like where we can exist. And we were talking about this week because it's really hot in LA, so you wouldn't be missing Los Angeles this week because it's scorchingly hot, right? And we say like, it's LA, like where we trade May and June for September and October, because May and June the Pacific Ocean keeps us abnormally cool, and so when everybody else has summer, we have like kind of this late spring, and then September, October, we get summer. And the difference being 25 years ago, when I moved here 27 years ago, summer meant like September, October, and it was, between 80 and 85. Right now, this week it'll be between 100 and 105. And progressively, that's like now all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm not going to go outside and go for a walk today, or I look out into the park and I see my unhoused neighbors, and I'm like, yeah, they're like yesterday, not to self-grandize, but like yesterday I was like, okay, I'm going to take them some water from the grocery store, just like drop down a pallet of water and be like, here, like, hopefully this is helpful for the day, because I know you're literally seeking shade, no different than any other animal or species would seek shade in 105-degree Fahrenheit existence, right? So talk to me a little bit if you have any insights or you have any thoughts on just this idea of like, the people who are privileged can joke about like, well, that's okay, I'll just move to Chicago, right? Like, because Chicago won't have cold winters anymore, and so then that'll be cool, like, and it'll be better than like. But that's nonsense. That's fantasy, silly talk. Like, because the reality is there are already, if correct me if I'm wrong, there are already like millions or tens of millions of people who are migrating from unlivable climates and unlivable habitats all around our planet in countries that people travel, that we all know, that we see on the maps. Like, so climate migration is like a very real thing. And what you're telling us about these threats is it's only going to accelerate,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's only going to accelerate like everything else. And so, like, I mean, you talk like, to me, that's the ultimate otherism.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's well, I don't. That's their problem, right? But climate migration then affects everything. It affects economies. It affects everything.
Yeah, yeah. And it transfers burdens from one place to another, and people are not willing to then carry those burdens because they think it's not that particular nation's problem, it was the other nation's problem. So it's sort of constantly outsourcing what is whole into these fragmented parts, and then saying this fragmented part can't care for the other part that is part of the same whole, and again, I think it's just our diminished understanding. Like nothing we've built, not even the sense of nationhood, is built on being inclusive, because it has to have these hard caps on where we end, where we start, and what we can include and what we'll no longer stand for. And so everything is divisive. We build divisive structures that are not going to be valid when everything comes to its precipice, right? When we hit the brink ecologically. None of the parameters that we have construed out of fiction, it's not actual, like the borders don't exist because they're all just geographical. It's one planet. So I think we're going to wake up to realize that every single construct we've come up with is just a fiction that we believe. And because I believe it and you believe it too, it becomes a truth.
Or they've all been put it to 100% agree, or put it in a different word, like they're all temporary.
Yeah, they're all temporary. Literally everything we've given rise to is temporary.
Right? Yeah, and we don't, and that's
including
beyond
us. We are temporary. And we don't seem to understand that on a very basic level. We think.
Oh yeah. I mean, you know me. I talk about it all. I talk about my own mortality all the time. Like I'm 56. I've got like realistically by family genealogy, I've probably got like 25 years left. And then when I say that out loud, people freak out and they're like, and they're upset and they're like, you're being so morbid, or they're just sad. And I'm like, it's okay to be sad that like an idea that someday I won't be here in your life anymore. But like, also like, that's just a given. Like someday I won't be here. Like I could be tomorrow, or don't say that. Like, it's not like bad luck. I'm not going to jinx myself. Like, it's just, I'm an animal. Like eventually I die. Like that's just how the cycle of life works. Like, I'm fascinated. I have a couple of specific questions. I'm not going to take a whole bunch more of your time. I mean, you and I could literally spend 6 hours doing this. It would be the greatest, longest podcast ever. But I want to be respectful of your day. Sure. So I have a couple of specific, like kind of actionable questions I want to ask you. And then I've got like kind of a punchline question that I'm just curious about that I'm going to hold to the end. So a couple of actionable things. And this is understanding everything we've talked about already, understanding the real important need to focus inward and think more holistically about the collective nature of all of us as species, as beings, as pairs in this whole thing, and not otherisms, not other everybody else. But let's just like to the young person, maybe to the super ambitious, like I want to change the world, Asher at 15 years old, like my niece right now in high school down in Orange County. Like, what are the 2 or 3 things someone like that, a young person like that, can do locally in their own community or in their own life to like activate their participation in this work? So I'm not necessarily saying what can they do to change the planet and stop climate change. I'm saying like, what can I tell my niece who's 15, 16 and passionately cares about many of these things that you care about? Like, what can she do in her life in suburban America to like activate herself in this cause? In this
we spoke about biodiversity loss earlier. So like, yeah, so like living according to the Living Planet report, which is WWF. I mean, I take that source, but there's other sources that have other like slightly tweaked number. It could be a 70% and stuff. But Living Planet report states that 69% of mammals and like biodiversity loss has occurred since 1970, right? Jesus. And that's a huge decline. Now, if I look at that number,
that's just my lifetime. That's
wildlife populations globally have plummeted in that period of time. So that's big mammals, that's bugs, that's birds, it's everything. So like, what can I do about reading that? I'm going to feel distressed. I'm going to feel doom and gloom. And then I go to my backyard and I see a blue jay darting around, and it's a brilliant flash of blue. I can put a bird feeder for it because I know the resources are scarce. It's not getting the food cycles it's used to. Weather's changing constantly on it. If I can support it, then I'm going to support it. I know people say don't feed wildlife. I get it. Like, but at the same time, at this point, we have taken so much that I have to give back what I can where I can. I put out like little bee homes so that they can build a beehive there. I have put out bee cups. Whether or not that works, it's pending my judgment because I have not.
But you're trying.
But I'm trying, right? I built more pollinator gardens out there so that hummingbirds, even if it's only one hummingbird that I've seen in my backyard, has something to drink other than nectar, which needs to be changed every other day when it's summer or hot, because if it gets mold, the hummingbird dies. So a lot of people put these nectar bottles out and the hummingbird dies because they have not changed the water.
Okay.
Right? So like, are you actually doing the right thing, or are you just doing it blindly and poorly?
Right.
So it's always better to not intervene with your feeder and actually create abundance of food that is natural food that it would eat anyway, by
Sure.
allowing for an ecosystem to thrive in your backyard. And I currently have such a big ecosystem in my backyard that I have kestrels landing on my trees, which is
Wow.
extraordinary, right? And it's taken literally a couple of months of me being here to have that kind of bird.
And being very intentional, and then being
Yeah,
thoughtful, and like doing the work, not just doing the work, but doing the work the right way.
yeah. And so I think really you can do a lot that is just allowing for natural solutions to find
Yeah.
expression in your immediate context.
I
Like
love
help
that.
your neighbors understand how they can do more pollinator gardens. That's a start. It's your immediate neighborhood changing for the better. Then think
Yeah.
about what can be done from there, like one step further. Like, can you plant more trees in the area? Can you appeal to local municipalities or like communal bodies that will allow you to exercise these solutions at scale within that landscape, within that zip code? So I always think about like, what are the things that affect me, that affect people in my immediate vicinity that I can do, right? Like yesterday, for instance, my landlord and I had a conversation about like pesticide and rodenticide, right? I was like, what measure are you going to take to address the field mice, which may be a problem for a house? So I don't want to be the tenant that's causing
Right.
a full ecosystem to eventually like demise her house, right? So I
Right.
asked her, I'm
Right.
like, what do you want to do about the field mice? Like, there are literally predatory birds now coming in. So if you are killing them the wrong way, using the wrong poisons, then you're going to kill the kestrels and the other birds that are coming into the backyard too. And then she was like, oh, it's a really good question. I'm going to go talk to the exterminator and see what we've been using and if there's a different way to address this solution,
Okay.
right? And so I think it's
So that's the
really,
power of
yeah,
conversation right there.
yeah,
Like, so you're like, hey, I have some knowledge.
yeah.
I'm going to share it with you. I'm not forcing you to make decisions. I'm just going to share my
And
knowledge
I
with
want
you.
you to arrive at a solution. So I'm working with
Right.
you towards the solution, which is that you don't want your wires chewed up. You don't want your house foundation to fall apart. And having
Right.
been a homeowner in the past, which I'll tell you is a whole other burden, is like, I know those were my concerns too, but there are natural ways to mitigate. For instance, you can put steel wool to prevent entry of rodents or things into your houses. And that's not nothing. It's just
Right.
steel wool being shoved into
Easy.
places.
Yeah.
So there are just simple, easy solutions that don't result in a cascade of death or dominoes being tipped in an adversarial direction that you can take or can advise others on to help improve the overall well-being of a landscape. And that's both human and wild. And also do not ever pit one against the other, because ultimately both lose.
Right.
I think the more no matter how far the others are coming at it from a siloed or segmented perspective, the more inclusive and aware and compassionate you
Love
remain,
that.
the more you're able to always advance the dialogue in a better direction. People will still continue listening to you because they know at least you have the bandwidth to remain open. Even if they can't be open, they know that you can remain open. And so they'll continue to come back to you, which I've
Yeah.
always wondered. I'm like, there are people who have completely different perspectives than me, politically, personally, value systems that are very different from me, who follow me on social media. And I don't understand sometimes why they continue to follow me, because obviously I'm going to continue to
It's what you just said
yeah,
though. That's and humbly I say this because now, having recognized it and how you just described that, that's me in a lot of people's
yeah.
lives. Like, I am that.
But
Like, and
keep
so therefore,
on
like,
yeah.
people will listen, or they'll like, I mean, there's some people I have like vehemently different
And
views
I
with, and
won't judge them or shut them down for sharing an alternative with me. And I
no,
always come back with a response that is mindful, factual, or based
yeah,
on
no,
like
and
what is the holistic perspective there, without
coming from that
shutting them
inclusive point of
down
view.
for the
Yeah.
conversation.
No, that's huge. Thank you for that. That's awesome. And by the way, this wasn't like a metaphorical 15-year-old. She's 16 actually, and she is super actively engaged, and she does passionately feel about these topics, not just because most young people do, but because she particularly does. This kid really, and she's equipped with a
Yeah,
lot of
ask her
the,
to always embody and emulate love. Even when people
yeah,
are small and shrunken and behaving
and
poorly, like
and
emulate love.
she, yeah, she's blessed. She has a lot of that intuitively inside of her already, and she's developing some of it, and she has a lot of you inside of her, honestly, as well. And so, like, anyway, I can encourage that, and then by proxy, other people that are listening to the show, hey, that's how you can encourage the young people in your life for the next generation of leaders, or you can apply it to yourself from the many nuanced lessons that Asher's been sharing with us today. So, all right, so big closing question for you. Like, are we gonna make it? Like, all right, so you're young, you're like 20 years younger than me, so I'm not gonna live to see you hit like 75 or 80, but like, I think I'll be 30 years from now. It's 2024, so like, let's just say I make it to 86, which would be like big. That'll be 2056. So like, are we going to make it? Like, are we going to make it to
Yeah,
20? Is this going to be a livable planet? Are we going to all have migrated to Canada by like 2070? Like, what's the?
So I think it's very critical in today's world to remain present. It's very critical. Every time I've gotten affected poorly or felt a little bit depressed even about the state of the world or like where it's going, it's because I'm thinking about where it's going and not being where I am.
Good for you.
You know, and I
Good,
think
great
it's so
lesson.
important to stop projecting, because it's like me, that's just worrying. And we're very good as a species at worrying. We've mastered the art of worrying. Like we worry about
Right.
everything, and 90%
So,
of the
so much so that we spend all our energy thinking about that instead of
doing something
dealing.
else. And I was like,
Right.
90% of the scenarios you've fathomed in your head do not come to pass, because it takes so many permutations playing out together to result in that cumulative black swan moment that we're shocked by. And that
Right.
comes from not being present. You're only surprised by a black swan because you haven't paid enough attention to see there are white swans and black swans, right? So it's like we are just so like not, we've got these blinders on and so not available to this moment at hand fully. If you're
Yeah,
here
I
and
love
you've
that.
shown up for now, then everything will take care of itself. Show up though, show up now, you know, in every way you can. And any time that you feel caught up in your personal dramas and whatever's unfolding in your life, work immediately on resolving that within you. Because the minute you make yourself available again, then the conversation moves forward again. Every time you shut yourself down and made yourself come back within you and you become a recluse or withdrawn, then you've isolated yourself from that whole and you've stopped participating. So in order to
That's
show up,
awesome.
create space within and continually create that space so that you can continually show up in the moment at hand.
That's terrific. And that's the most beautiful, articulate way to ever say, Rob, that's just a rubbish question. Like, it's not about 30 years from now. Focus on the now. I love that. That's great. Because you're right. Like, we can extrapolate. There's that show I shared with you on Apple, like literally extrapolations, right? And you could, but the truth is, like, the problems are present today. Like like we don't need the, oh my God, if we don't do X, Y is going to happen. Right. It's happening already.
Right.
Like, so like, how can we live our lives more sustainably, more just sustainably as humans? Like that encompasses the wholeness of the whole exercise. That's awesome. I said to you when we started, the audience doesn't need to care or know, but like you were having a rough day. So I said to you when we started, I hoped at least for the next 60, 75 minutes that we would put you in a better mood. So I hope we have, I see a bigger smile. I see a bigger smile now than I did 75 minutes ago.
You know, sometimes when I have a conversation with you, I feel like I come upon the perspective from myself that I need in order to be more aligned.
Right, but first of all, thank you for saying that. Second of all, like, isn't that the point of all great conversation with anybody that we care about or that cares about us, right? Is that it becomes a mirror to us to process our thoughts. I oftentimes say, and it's why I'm so passionate about what we do here with this show. It's why I've now doubled down on putting my life into this as my career and my livelihood going forward to build a business around telling these better stories. It's because to me, it's like, you know, how people literally, the science would tell us that, you know, when you write something down, like it literally is able to be absorbed into your brain more readily than when you type it on a computer. Like we know these things, right? And to me, conversation is that. Like, and I know it's not that for everybody, but for me and for a lot of people in the world, like conversation is like when I verbalize it, and when I verbalize it in a dialogue with someone in nuanced, complex, and you know, kind of moving ways, that commits it to here. Like that, like it's connected to me more deeply. I better understand it. I better process my thoughts. When I'm asking you questions, I'm literally asking you questions that I'm curious about. I mean, I tell Deanna all the time. I'm like, the beauty of this is our fucking show. This is me fundamentally curious. And yes, I hope that, and I craft it in such a way, ideally or idealistically, that it's representative of like what a lot of people might be asking themselves or the curious questions that a lot of people might have. And so when this, for you and I, and the place you hold in my life, like I know you wake up and go to sleep every day, all day, thinking about these things that we just got to talk about. And so to me, you're not just expert in these, which you are, but you are consumed by them. You're obsessed by them. And so much the same way, if this was 100 plus years ago, like I would have wanted to have Thomas Edison on my podcast, not because I would have wanted to talk about how much money he raised by, you know, inventing the light bulb and how he did a commercial deal with General Electric or Westinghouse. Like I wouldn't have cared so much about that, but I would have wanted to like have a conversation with Thomas Edison, who famously ideated, thousands and thousands and thousands of things and failed at all of them except for a few. And I would have wanted to understand why he thought about his life and how he approached life and how he did his work and why he did his work. And because that's just me. And I think, as I said at the top of the show, this is my little contribution to the world, right? Like, you're building Henoscene, and you have your personal advocacy, and you are a speaker, and you are engaged at a policy level in ways that, thank God, you are, because I'm not, and I know you are, and that's great. And to me, my show and this conversation is like a contribution to try and leave this world a little bit better than we found it. I'm always fascinated, like you say, about how people follow you, and you're like, why would that person follow me? The similar situation on my end with this content or other things we do is, like, we just started offering this show on YouTube this year, right? So now we do this, and we do the audio version. But the funny thing, and I don't know how any of this stuff works, but like on YouTube, it's like there are episodes that we did back in the beginning of the year, like after the rebranding, and we start, and they just keep clicking up, like the numbers of views, and I'm like, there are just people in the world who are finding this, and I'm like, that in a sense is more motivating to me, because now I'm like, this conversation is an archival piece of our humanity that you and I may just, right? We may have fun with it now, but like someday in the archives of human history and knowledge, like this is the, papyrus papers from Egypt, right? Because it's just us talking for 75 minutes about things that are important, and then people will consume it, and it'll be useful or a mirror or a challenge to them wherever they are in that moment in the arc of human history. And that's pretty cool.
And I have to say that I feel uplifted right now, and I'm very grateful, and I have to acknowledge it, that you are always so enthusiastic and willing to lean in and curious. Those are such inspiring traits, because it brings out the best in anyone you're talking to. It pushes me. I was about to say the word force, but it's not a force. It impacts me to be different than I was before our chat, right?
That's awesome. Thank you. That's a gift. It's a gift to hear that.
Impacted, which is really wonderful and meaningful.
We'll close with this. I'll leave you with a phrase that my dad used to say to us all the time. And then when he was teaching me to be a relationship person in business, this was like his mantra. He said, don't push people to where you think they want to go. Pull them towards where they want to go.
Mm-hmm.
And that's essentially what you and I are doing. Is you and I are gently helping pull each other towards where we want to be. And we hope that the people that listen to this and consume this conversation, that we're gently pulling them towards the place that they want to be. Because I fundamentally do believe that when you strip away all the ego and the self-grandization that you and I were talking about, like, I think we are all YIMBYs.
Yeah.
Like, I think everybody in society at some point or another, like, truly just wants everybody to have everything too.
Yeah. And I think we want to be happy. And yes. Fundamentally, we just don't know how to get there. And the thing is, I'm writing this book right now called Impact Anatomy, and the whole premise of impact for me is it's neither good nor bad. Impact is just this
impact.
Yeah.
It's just impact.
Where something has applied itself onto something else in such a way that it's transformative. For one way or the other, it could be good or bad, but it's transformative fundamentally. And that's what I'm looking to explore is how are we transformative and continually in that space of willing to be transformed.
Well, when you are ready with that book, I will be in line to have you come back and talk about it and explore that topic and explore that conversationally. I can't wait. I'm so grateful for your friendship. I'm so grateful for you being just a part of this now, as we refer to you guest alumni. You're part of the community of just really, really bright and impressive, aspirational people who are, as we say, just trying to apply some entrepreneurial thinking to this thing we call life and work, and just trying to leave it a little bit better than we found it. So grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode as much as I did recording it. As always, we thank you so much for listening and watching. Today's show was recorded here in Los Angeles and produced by the incomparable Deanna Bernal in Mexico City. We can only grow this show by you listening and sharing the show with friends. So please find, like, follow, subscribe, and share our audio-only show on Spotify, Apple, or via any other popular podcasting platforms. as well as find the video version of our show now available on our YouTube channel over at Entrepreneurial Thinkers. And of course, you can follow along on our various social media platforms for fun and informative clips and content at Entrepreneurial Thinkers, wherever you can find us. And if you'd like to connect with me, you can find me at I am Rob Ryan on just about any social media platform. Gracias, thank you, and have an awesome day.